Today's episode is brought to you by Positively Productive Systems, whose mission is to be the antidote to your stress and to provide compassionate productivity resources and coaching that help you heal and achieve. Be sure to check out both free and paid resources at positivelyproductive.com/resources.
There is a difference for me between community and teams. The team is the collection of people to go do something, the tactical specific level. The community is the sense of everyone and everything that's involved to be able to collect people together to ultimately achieve that goal. It's the idea of everyone being together, whereas the team is the tactical mission itself.
You're listening to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zaratny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a coach certified in time and stress management, helping overwhelmed clients make space for what matters. Join me each episode as we explore ways to live a more proactive, productive life with topics and guests that speak to simplifying self-awareness, systems, and so much more. I understand overwhelm personally as a fellow multi-passionate entrepreneur, wife and mom to kids and cats, and former caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. Welcome to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa, and today we're talking about community building as a critical part of successful leadership and successful teams. Communities are all around us, as are teams, but they aren't always where or what you expect them to be. If you stop to think for a moment about the groups you're in and the way you interact and collaborate with others, I bet you can see how you're part of all sorts of communities. And when you're the one bringing a community together, that makes you the leader. What does it take to create a successful community? That's what my guest and I are discussing today. And who better than someone with a military background? I'm so pleased for you to meet Simon Kardynal. He's a Canadian, parent, podcaster, military veteran, leader, and speaker. Simon believes leadership is about building community, bringing the individual's unique capabilities together to create cohesive, impactful, and efficient teams. And he shares his wisdom for how to do just that in our conversation today. We talk about how to think of communities and the perspective a good leader must have. And Simon shares the many benefits of building a community. We talk about different kinds of communities and leaders and how they relate to teams. Simon even digs into active listening and outlines so many details. It's like a masterclass in it. If you're interviewing others or you plan to, you'll definitely want to listen for that advice. I was honored to be on episode 81 of Simon's podcast, Trench Leadership, a podcast from the front. And I'm so pleased to be able to return the favor. During the rapid wrap-up, he suggests two resources, two books on leadership that I have added to the favorites page of the Positively Productive website, positivelyproductive.com/favorites. And his mantra is something I've decided is very Canadian, so you'll want to listen for that. He also apologized a few times, which is very Canadian, but I am not apologizing one bit for inviting him onto the podcast because you are going to get so much from this episode. As always, I would love to hear your ahas and your big takeaways, so please message me with those. Now, without further ado, let's join Simon to talk about how successful leaders build strong communities. Welcome to the Positively Living Podcast, Simon Kardynal. It is so good to have you here with me. I have had the honor of being on your podcast, and now we're switching the roles and digging into a really good topic today.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. I really love being a podcast host. And there's honestly one of the greatest things about being a podcast host is getting to meet other podcast hosts because we are all passionate about what we're doing. And the passion that you exude with everything that you're doing with your show and trying to help others, it's amazing. It's authentic. It's genuine. It's all the words about tying people together. And I'm so happy and honored to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate that. And, what we're digging into today is community, and we are definitely part of a community. But before we dig into the topic du jour, I'd love it if you'd share a bit about who you are and who you help, what you do, and most importantly, I think, what makes you light up.
I've got to tell you, it's a long story. I am 48, so I'll do my very best to give you the Coles notes if I could. So basically, my parents, my dad was in the military, and I'm a Canadian. I'll backpedal even a little bit further. I'm a Canadian. I live in Ottawa, Ontario, which is Canada's national capital city. I do not say, actually, there's very few Canadians who say a boot. I don't like poutine, if you can believe that. And maple syrup is okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but I don't see what the hype is about. My father was in the military. He was in the Royal Canadian Air Force, and it was something that I always looked up to. I saw that his uniform and what he was doing every day was almost a call to action of doing something more important, while at the same time having a career, a personal career that was going to have value. That carried a lot with me. And I did all that. Because of that, I knew my whole life I wanted to join the military. So I did that at 19 years old, joined the infantry. And that was a lot of fun. There are some pretty wild moments that got me into that, but that's Cole's notes for later. But I got there and I joined the infantry and I did some international and domestic tours. And then there's a program in the Canadian military whereby you can change your trades, apply to change your trades. So that I joined the Royal Canadian Air Force and I became what was called an aircraft structures technician, which is very, very loosely like auto body for airplanes. Eventually, what happened after 26 years, I had started a master's degree. And interestingly enough, the community I had lived in my entire adult life, I now was being exposed to a new community, which we'll talk a little bit later on. And I realized that the military community I had surrounded myself in didn't have to be the only thing that I had to exist in, there were other options out there. And that was an awakening moment for me. And at that moment, I then realized the passion that I had for being in the military wasn't as strong. I don't want to say it wasn't there, but I would say it wasn't as powerful as it was before. And I knew that there were other things available. So I did that. I ended up retiring from the regular force and I took a job with a company called Calian as a contract manager. And at the same time, I realized I want to do those things in passion in my life that I wasn't able to do. So I went and got recertified as a private pilot. There were a bunch of other little things I wanted to check out. I wanted to create a podcast. All of these different things now afforded me that opportunity. After a couple of years of that, I had an opportunity where I could rejoin the Royal Canadian Air Force as a primary reservist, which is like part-time work, if you want to look at it that way. And I'm the squadron warrant officer at 412 Squadron here in Ottawa. And that is basically a fancy way of saying I'm an administrator who advises the commanding officer on all things military at the administrative level, not necessarily the operational level. So that's it. And here we are.
And here we are. And the podcast is what connected us. And what I love about your podcast is your focus on leadership. And you can, I'm sure, bring that into our conversation. I love that so much of what you're describing, these twists and turns, that you made an intentional choice to find these things that light you up and to do those things and to realize actually that they were out there. And I think sometimes that's such a big step for us to be like, you know what? I do have options. I don't have to stay where I am. Keep doing what I'm doing. And so that right there is takeaway number one. Let's highlight that hard because I love that. No matter what, no matter how amazing it is, you get to choose what you do next and you get to choose when you do it.
And you're absolutely right. Like I was doing very well in the Air Force. I was at the rank of what's called Master Warrant Officer, which is the second highest rank a non-commissioned member can achieve in our system. And I was in succession planning, all the different things. I was on my way. I was within a year of getting promoted to Chief Warrant Officer and doing all the stuff. So I was doing quite well. I didn't leave the military because I was upset or, the different reasons. It was just, I knew it was time for me to go and make a change and test other things. And that's okay. That's absolutely okay.
Yeah. And it's a wonderful thing when you know that this particular season of your life can come to an end or transition into something different and potentially better for you. We've definitely talked about this concept on the podcast, and I'm planning to talk about it even more. When is it okay to quit? Why do we think of it as quitting? It's transitioning into something else. But The other thing that I noticed in your descriptions, and I feel like it segues beautifully into what we're talking about today, is this idea that, you were in the military and that's certainly a community, but that there are other communities out there. And something that you have done, and the reason I wanted to talk with you about this today, you've found communities or built communities yourself and very quickly. And that's something that's I think is important for all of us, maybe more so like, the extroverts or people, that are looking for or needing support. But I love that you've been able to do this, and let's dig into that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity. Community building is one of the fields that I believe is not spoken about enough. There's a lot of other terminology that's used to speak about this, but it tends to be at the more tactical, individually stylized items in it. But the whole concept of community building, for me, comes back to the other concept of systems thinking, whereby everything and everyone is interconnected. Peter Senge is the father of this idea, this process, and everything is interconnected. And when you start looking around and seeing that the little weird things that have tied things together are there, how do we get to this point? How do we get there? Look at how you and I met. We're both podcast hosts. I don't live in the United States, but through a thread on Facebook app, we were able to make these connections and do a podcast guest swap because of that community. And the power of these items, bringing people together from a leadership perspective, it's invaluable.
Yeah, what you're talking about is so holistic, and that's really my vibe, right? That what you said, and I say it all the time, especially when it comes to productivity, everything's connected. The more that we can find that, the better. So you said, there's benefits in terms of leadership. Let's keep digging into the benefits of community. When we find it, when we build it, whatever, what benefits do we see?
Everything I'm going to explain is common sense type of items, but sometimes it's about bringing them together in one tight little bundle to be like, oh yeah, these things are connected. So one of the great things about building a strong, safe community is that it builds more trust. It's an inherent thing. And once that trust is built, then we can now rely on that. The productivity will go up because the team members know that each one are able to trust each other. And then where that goes on, maybe the conversations don't have to happen as often because we know we can trust each other to do what we need to do. Or maybe we have more conversations because now we know we can trust each other to have maybe a tough conversation or have a great conversation and know that that compliment is authentic and not wonder why so-and-so would say something. Everything is interconnected, and it's a big deal with that. When we're talking about a team, as in specifically, we're talking about the team leaders, because that is the focus of my podcast, Trench Leadership, that it's the leader's responsibility, not necessarily to create the team. There's a common misconception that it's the leader's job to make the team. I would argue it's everyone's responsibility to make the team and maintain it and make sure it's safe. It's the leader's role to understand what that team needs to be and help the team go together in the right direction to create the right team for the moment. Because the team will shift. The people in it might remain the same, but the goal might have to change.
Okay, we talk about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We need trust. We need safety, right? I guess is more so that comes with it, right? And trust is a part of that. When you feel safe, you are also more apt to take risks, take chances, be more innovative. And that's incredible because when you can have a team, when you can lead a team, be part of a team or a community, however you want to put it, and everyone who joins feels that safety, that's actually something that has been very important to me as a podcast host, that you show up feeling like I value everything you're going to share freely. Let's dig in. And when that happens, oh my goodness, the conversations are so much more powerful as a result.
I feel, and my experiences have been that people crave that safety. They crave that ability to operate in a time and a space where everyone is trustworthy, where we can all rely on each other and trust each other to go forward. It's not even that we need it. We do. We all need it. But people crave that. But in the context of a teamwork in the system that we exist in now, I've found that it comes down to the leader doing two specific things. And the first one is checking their assumptions. And what I mean by that is when the leader is doing something, for example, I have my phone off to the right here. If we're in a Zoom meeting and I get my messages and everyone can clearly tell that I'm not paying attention, then they don't think they can trust me. As a general rule of thumb, people can say, oh, I can't trust that person's actually going to take the time to listen to what I have to say. which rolls me into my next point, which is active listening. And I don't think you'll find too many proponents louder or more desiring of active listening than you will find in me. The importance for anyone in a team to truly sit and be in that moment and actively listen to what is being said to them and hear what's even going beyond the words is so important to create any type of environment that is going to be productive and healthy. The big thing with active listening is to make sure the other person knows that you're there and you can't explain things too much. For example, when I'm actually having a type of a conversation, an in-person conversation, and I think there might be a point where I need to take notes, more often than not, I don't have an actual piece of paper and a pen with me. So I'll explain to the person, hey, look, when you're talking, I may be picking up my phone to write notes down. This is why I'm doing that. Keep going. I'm going to write this down. And if we need to, we'll come back to that point. But I just want to make sure I'm actually capturing this. And the message that's being said to that person, other than that, what the physical words, it's okay. Simon has taken the time to listen to this and not only listen to it, have something in place so that he can go and reflect on that. And that's important because quite often, a lot of us, I like to use the term chewing. We're going to chew on an idea in the back of our mind and we'll come back to it 10 minutes afterwards because our subconscious will still be churning that information, especially if the topics are changing quickly or often. And the other way that we can ensure that the other person is understanding what's going on and we are practicing active listening is to create eye contact. Now, that doesn't mean you sit there and you stare and you don't blink and you don't do anything. The contact is there and you're putting your hands down or whatever it is you need to do and make sure that that person is aware that you are in the moment, not thinking about the next thing. And more importantly, not thinking about the next thing you're going to say to rebut what they're talking about or add on to it. The individual, they want to say something. They are saying something. Give them the opportunity, give them the platform to do that. Even if you're desperate to do it, trust me on this, give the person the opportunity to stop talking. And it will take a while to understand when to stop talking or when to start talking. There might even be some awkward pauses, but that's okay. You just explain that, hey, I was just ensuring that you had fully articulated your point. Is it my turn? Or however you want to word it. And then we go forward from there. If a person is doing this in a way that is authentic and they're actually trying to hear what's being said, eventually what a person will start doing is they will start not just hearing and listening to what's being said, but you'll start actively listening to all the different things that are going on around them. So body language. If a person is leaning forward, sometimes when they're done talking, they have a tendency to sit back or they have a tendency to lean forward and go, eh? When you're able to start seeing the repetition, and there is always a pattern with people when they're speaking. When you're able to start seeing that, you'll be able to start knowing when you're getting close to you'll be able to share your point. And that will then in turn stop the other thing that I think is so vital for someone who is on the receiving end of a conversation. Try very, very hard to stop nodding your head going, yeah, great point. Totally agree. A, you're cutting them off. More often than not, it's meant to be the best of intention, but the research has shown, a better way to word that, has that person thinking, okay, well, they just want me to shut up so that they can get their point out. Now I'm not being heard. That's eroding trust. And when that trust is eroded, they may not feel as safe to speak up again. So those types of things are very important. And then the other way to ensure that a person is active listening is to rebut whatever the point was with an open question. And the way I like to do that is as I'm listening to what's being said, I'm trying to take it in and I'm trying to really notice the highlighted points. And then I'll say, well, thank you very much for that, depending on what the conversation is. What I've heard in this was X, Y, and Z. And further inside of that, if that's indeed correct, this is what I would like to take away from that. And maybe this is what I could offer to that. Does that make sense? And I always try a word with, does that make sense? Have I heard that correctly? Most often, most people, when they hear that type of a phrase, is like, oh yeah, my supervisor took the time to hear what I said. And that listening, that skill of actively listening to what's being said will carry the team together so much quicker and build that larger community, which is ultimately the leadership's desire.
So much goodness in that. And so you not only described the benefits of active listening, but the elements of it. And one of the things you didn't come out and say, but I felt through your description was something that is so incredibly important for any understanding and for any building, which is communication. Being very clear about something. And the other thing that I feel is that what you're describing builds respect.
Very much so. It's that level of respect. It's an unwritten dialogue that I respect you enough to allow you to finish your thought. And respect is built. It's not one thing that's just automatically given to someone just because they're in charge. Someone may have no choice. They may have to follow the leader because that person is in charge, but that doesn't mean the person is respected. And that's okay. I think that respect does need to be earned and it should be earned. And I think the leader should want to have that respect placed upon them because they've earned it. And not because they're the leader, but because of the person that they are. And once that's happened, again, people can smell, if I could put it this way, people can smell BS a mile away. If the leader's just saying stuff and kind of nodding their head to do whatever, you're not building a community. You're just putting a group of people together. When I was in the military, there were many, especially in the infantry, many things that I did not want to do. I had no choice in the matter because I was in the infantry, and that's just what it was. We were going to go do that. And yet we still had a very strong community inside our platoon of 30 people and the sections of 10 people because we relied on each other to get through all of the things that were happening. As happy as you could be in an unpleasant situation. And that's just the way it is in any working environment.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. Even in the best of situations, things are going wrong. And this is where we get into ideas of resilience, right? Because when you are building trust, you are building respect, you are communicating well, you are working cohesively, right? That's the idea of the team. I want to step back for a moment to make sure that we're understanding the sort of the breakdown or maybe the org chart, if you will, of these concepts. So we're talking about building community, and you're talking about the community essentially as in a team. Let's clarify quickly, maybe, or give for instances of types of communities. Like, yes, I can immediately think of a team in like the corporate world, but can we dig into some of the places where we might see this kind of community, need this kind of leadership, need to be this kind of team member, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my experience has been in the military for sure. You can't do 27 years in the regular force and not have to learn about building teams. Inside of other organizations, the company I work with in Callion, the community that I work with in there, I work in a division called Advanced Technologies. And inside that, my team is 7 or 8 people. I'm terrible at the math. I could figure it out later. But we are a relatively small group. And we all get along very well, even though we've really only met a few times because I started that company right in the middle of one of the COVID waves that was attacking Canada. And yet, because of the way our leader was able to find unique ways to bring us together, we really are a community. Sure, we're a team, that goes without saying, but we're spread out all over the Ottawa region, which is pretty significant. And the value of that is just incredible, and how we're able to do that. And what I found was interesting in that in the military, it was with a very clearly defined hierarchy: corporal, master corporal, sergeant, warrant officer. You get the idea. The leader is very obvious. The person with the highest rank, they win. They're in charge. Inside of the civilian industry, more often than not, that's still the case. The vice president is going to outrank me. Like, that's just the way it is. But inside both of those environments, there was an opportunity to allow us to speak up and share our opinions. So in the Air Force, as an aircraft maintenance technician, the Royal Canadian Air Force is renowned for having one of the most robust maintenance programs in the world. And that is because, A, they're very good at engineering. That's helpful. But more importantly, it's because of the culture that has been created where everyone feels safe to be able to speak up when something unsafe might be happening. Now, at the end of the day, there is, of course, the caveat: it's still the military, and someone gets to say, no, we're flying that plane, or I'm fine, be quiet. Okay, I voice my concerns, and we go from there. So there is a bit of a balance inside of that. But the advantage of that is that when everyone feels like they can speak up and be heard, then there's not going to be that fear that things will go down. And then ultimately productivity goes up. That community is essential because it carries with us forever. That feeling of a community, you just know it when it's there, and there's nothing better.
Yeah. And what you said with having a place where it feels safe to speak up, that's huge, huge, especially, in cases of safety. And I mean, like, companies that are doing things where safety is required, or groups or communities where safety is required. But yeah, even beyond that, the idea of what's best for everyone, and that idea may come from anywhere. So I'd love to take it just a little further for the sake of the entrepreneurs who are listening, those who are, and many of us have come from the corporate world and been like, I've been on a team, Simon, and let me tell you, like, about that team. So with that in mind, there is something beautiful in saying, okay, now that we have the reins here, we have a say in this. So first of all, let's spitball here and make sure that we're coming up with different ways that there may be a team that we're not even thinking, oh yes, that's a team, and who might be the leader or how we can be the leader. Definitely, I'll bring it up again. I did it before. I think in podcasting, we have a community, and then when we work together, we're collaborating. You and I right now, we're a team.
I totally agree with you. I was just going to say that exact same thing.
I love that. But if you weren't going to say that, I'd be totally okay with it, and it'd be totally safe for you to do so.
Absolutely. It's like, well, I don't know. Maybe let's talk about that a bit.
I love that. Yes, it's wonderful when we can be in agreement. And admittedly, when I bring people onto the podcast, I vetted them to make sure that our values are in alignment. But that doesn't necessarily mean that our thoughts or ideas are going to be the same. And that's the beauty of it. So yeah, when we are collaborating, we're definitely working as a team. The other way that I'm immediately thinking of is when I am working with different independent contractors and I'm considered the leader, but I actually love when independent contractors, especially I'm thinking like designers or something, will step in and say, have you thought about this? What about this way? I'd like you to consider. This is what I understand from you, and maybe we could do it this way, as opposed to tell me what you want and I'll do whatever you want because you're the quote leader, right?
The challenge in a lot of organizations is that the measurement of success is going up the corporate ladder, which generally tends to mean now we are going to be the leaders. We're going to be in charge. I'm in charge. I'm amazing. Look, the system is telling me that. And that's a challenge. So I guess a lot of times when people have asked me, well, Simon, how can I build the community? The first question I always ask everyone is, well, do you even want to be the person in charge of making the community happen? If you don't want to be the leader, that's okay. It's time to have this bit of honesty with ourselves. I've met many people that realize, you know what, I don't want to be in charge. I want to go in, I want to do my thing, and I want to support the team as best I can, but I don't necessarily want to be the person making those decisions. That's all right. At least now you know, and that will also help the team be stronger, building that community. This is my role. My role is not to be in charge. That's okay.
That is such a good point, too. When we're talking about building a community, it's like, okay, what are the tips? It's like, well, first of all, do you want to build one? Do you want to be in charge, or do you want to be part of one? But still, this conversation is so important because you may have an opportunity to share this with someone who wants to lead it. I've definitely had situations with other entrepreneurs where, maybe it's like, I don't want to start this, but you can, and here's some advice. So they may be open to that idea. So yeah, knowing whether or not you actually want to do this in the first place is important. And it sounds like if you do, and once you decide, stepping into a leadership role where you create safety and you build respect so that the connections that we have are deep, and there's a word I'm looking for. I almost wanted to say potent. And it could be. That could be right.
Yeah.
But really, it's that the connection is there so that you can work, maybe it's cohesively. That might be the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, that's a strong word. And it's apt for what we're talking about, because that's the idea. The ultimate goal is to have everyone being able to work together towards the common goal, whatever that may be.
Would you also say, and is this something that you feel that you've done with your Trench Leadership podcast, is building a community of your audience for the podcast?
I do think I have. And I would say that because more of my podcast, it tends to focus on emerging leaders. That's the whole goal. And how that came about was because when I was going through my master's of arts in leadership, I started listening to podcasts, and I found that podcasts tend to fall into three different categories. One was super duper niche. And then the other one was specifically, more often it was coming from some type of C-suite or a CEO, CTO, CPO, whatever, saying, if you want to be the best leader ever, then do everything I did over my past 40 years. And then the other one I found tended to be, a lot of faith-based groups. And I'm not saying good or bad. I'm just saying this was my strict observation in that. When I was going through my Master of Arts, I'm learning about all these different principles like Peter Senge and systems thinking as an example. And I remember thinking to myself, gee, I sure wish I'd heard about that when I was a brand new leader, or I wish I'd heard about this system. Not necessarily a graduate level understanding of these things, but definitely knowing they exist. And then so that happened a bunch of different times. The next thing I know, it was time to figure out what I was going to do with this information I'd stuffed into my head for 2 years. And I came up with the idea of creating this podcast. Now, to take you all the way back to the beginning of the question, where how do I know I'm building a community? Well, I think I know I'm building a community because I'm at a point now where in the beginning of the podcast, I would have to go out and go to a lot of different Facebook message sites or various places, friends, and ask them to be guests for my show and for various reasons. And that was okay. I was very content with that. But now, because of the amount of episodes I've put out, I just released episode 85, and the amount of guests that I've had throughout the world, now more often than not, I'm able to have people come to me and say, hey, Simon, I think that your message is strong to speak about emerging leaders or community, whichever it may be. I would love to be a guest on your show because your message is authentic and reaches me. I'm like, that tells me that I'm building a community, which brings me to a point I think I forgot to mention in the beginning. There is a difference for me between community and teams. The team is the collection of people to go do something, the tactical specific level. The community is the sense of everyone and everything that's involved to be able to collect people together to ultimately achieve that goal. It's the idea of everyone being together, whereas the team is the tactical mission itself.
Oh, I love that distinction. Thank you for that. Okay, so I've written down, collaborations, working with contractors, building an audience. And if I may, I'd love to share some of my thoughts. I just wrote down a few notes of when I was reflecting on what we would talk about in building community and what I think would be involved in that. Offering help, asking for help, being inclusive, and especially this one, I thought of you, sharing success. Let me tell you, when I was on your podcast, you celebrated my podcast so much. So right back at you. Okay. 85 episodes is amazing. That's amazing. Pod fade is a real thing in this industry. So every time, 25 episodes, 50 episodes, oh my gosh. And you are well on your way to that 100.
I can't wait.
Incredible. You were celebrating that I had hit 150, and you mentioned it so many times. You shared and you celebrated my success with me. And to me, I think as what part of a team, part of a community, or maybe what builds the community aspect of that we're all in this together is when we celebrate together. That feels very important to me.
I completely agree with you in that, because quite often what happens is organizations, especially busy organizations and busy teams, will be like, okay, great. That was a fantastic success. What's next? That's the question that happens all the time. But if someone or something goes wrong, we will analyze the crap out of that to figure out how to make sure we don't do that again and spend that time stewing in that shame bubble of what do we just do here? Those successes are just as important as everything else, because if we don't take the time to look back and say, hey, look, we are an amazing team. The community we're building, everything we've got going on right now, look at what we've done. It's very hard to quantify what exactly we've created and our successes. So if there's an opportunity to do that, get all over that.
As of the time that you and I are recording this, I have just recorded an episode on why we need to savor and celebrate our success. And I think when it comes to teams and community, it's extra important that we celebrate each other's and feel that safety, right? Of celebrating our own and not feeling like it's a brag, but instead we welcome it. So, I mean, you hit number 85 there. You are being invited onto podcasts. Hello, hi, welcome right here.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's so much good that's happening. I definitely celebrate that with you. With that in mind, this is feeling like a great place to wrap up, but is there anything else that you're like, oh, I wish we'd touched upon this thing, or something that you want to leave everyone with in thinking about community building?
I would like to offer that the idea of community building is, I like to imagine an umbrella, and the community is the umbrella portion that's actually protecting everyone and everything underneath it. It's the shell that allows the team to be able to go forward in that safe environment that everyone is craving.
I love that. The umbrella. So important for a rainy day. Okay. Now, before we get into the rapid wrap up, super fun, let us know where we can find you online. Remind us again about your podcast and everything else you got going on.
Thank you so much for that opportunity as well. The name of the podcast is Trench Leadership, a podcast from the front. It can be found where anyone finds their podcasts. I also just recently launched a YouTube channel with that as well. So feel free to jump on over there, Trench Leadership, a podcast from the front. If people want to reach out to me and have a conversation with me, or maybe they want to be a guest, or we just want to chat, I'm very open to that. The two best ways to do that would be on LinkedIn. You can find Simon Michael Kardynal on LinkedIn, or I also have a Trench Leadership page there as well. And I'm also on Instagram, Trench Leadership 1. I'm everywhere.
And we will have those links in the show notes to make it super easy to find. Or in most cases, if you're already following me, you can definitely find Simon because we're hanging out together. All right, you ready for this rapid wrap up?
Let's do it.
All right, you're just filling in the blanks for me, please. A song that lifts my spirits, makes me dance is?
Courage by the Tragically Hip, an iconic Canadian band. The song, the actual lyrics, kind of a bummer, but the music itself gets you going. So
there you go. As long as it's making you dance and it's lifting your spirits, that works. How about a quote or a mantra that inspires me that, I share often? ...
and that's okay. I say that to people all the time. I don't want to do this. And I will very quickly go back with ... and that's okay. You don't need to justify something. If you don't want to, we'll figure it out. Sometimes we have no choice. We have to do it, but it's okay if you don't want to.
I love that. It sounds like a great leader line and also very Canadian.
Very true.
Okay, how about a resource? It could be a book, an app, anything that has made my life better is?
My author of choice, my leadership author of choice is Margaret J. Wheatley. And her book, Leadership and the New Science, is transformative in a lot of ways. She's very pragmatically speaks about leadership in a way that helps people understand that, okay, this is important. And then she will apply a scientific context to that. Instead of just saying leadership is important, this is why. And it's a different way of looking at the research. The other book I would like to plug really, really quickly, if I could, we talked about him already, is Peter Senge and the Fifth Discipline. I happen to have a copy of it right here. He's the father of systems thinking, and that is basically the idea that everything is connected. And once you start seeing things from a systems thinking lens, you can't stop.
Okay, so this is good stuff. I'm totally going to check that book out because I think I'm already thinking that way. So that works. Love it. I'm happy to put both of those on my favorites page so it'll be easy to find. All right, and last but definitely not least, Simon, what are you grateful for today?
I am grateful for the ability to talk about communities. I know it sounds kind of trite and kind of silly, but I am so passionate about getting the message out about that and helping people understand that everyone and everything we do is community. Even people who identify as towards the introverted side of the world, there is a community for them. Introverts unite. There is all kinds of that. No matter what we do, no matter where we are, we want and we crave community, even if that community is just me and the TV, watching a TV show. That's your community. I just love talking about it and helping people see that everything we do revolves around communities.
I love that callback, and I am certainly grateful for you, grateful to have connected, and I want to thank you, Simon, for shining your leadership and community light so brightly in this world and for sharing it with us today.
Thank you so much for the time today. This has been a pleasure, and I'm humbled to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today. Your time is precious and limited, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you have feedback, questions, or want to schedule a chat, head to positivelyproductive.com/connect. And if you are looking for any of the resources referenced on the podcast, from books to products to training and more, go to positivelyproductive.com/resources.